Our next speaker is a Holocaust survivor and author of the book Holocaust and Resistance. She was marked for extermination by the Nazis but was saved by complete strangers. Unfortunately, her mother had perished in Auschwitz. She spent her early years in various orphanages until she was taken to New York. She tells her life story in gripping detail, and because of her experience, she has become a lifelong advocate for peace and justice. She is a staunch supporter of the Palestinians and now the Kashmiris. Her book is available today at a special price of $20, and she has agreed to autograph all copies. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Weiss.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a great honor to speak to you. I'd like to especially thank Zafar Bengash and Ali Mala. It's great to see your signs here on Kashmir. This is our fight, one of our big fights today, which I support, of course. I was first welcomed to this center 15 years ago. I came with a solidarity delegation opposing the U.S. war in Iraq. I also remember the big fight we had against the Canadian government, who was trying to shut down the Canadian Arab Federation. And at that time, we also joined to defend Venezuela and other friends of Iran against U.S. and Canadian sanctions and coups. Later, we worked together for freedom of Palestine and the defense of Iran against U.S. and Israeli attacks. Freedom, now, we also continue to fight for freedom for Kashmir. As the Pakistan government minister, Fawad Chaudhry, said, "Do not let Kashmir become another Palestine." Our united work has embraced forces with different religious and political beliefs, but common commitment to freedom and human dignity. Our unity today calls to mind the movement that saved my life as a child. It was in 1943. I was 2 years old. The Nazi ruler Adolf Hitler had marked me down to be killed because I'm Jewish. Hitler's Germany had an evil plan to colonize vast territories within Europe. He set out to kill tens of millions of inhabitants while replacing them with a new population of German settlers. Like all colonization projects, Hitler's scheme was justified on a racial theory. He thought Germans were the master race, while Africans, Slavs, Gypsies, Asiatics, and Jews were subhuman. Today, India's Modi has embarked on a similar scheme in Kashmir, and India itself drawing inspiration from the hate-filled ideology of Nazism.
Shame.
By the way, the word subhuman, like much of Nazi racial theory, was originated by racists in the United States. For the racists, all Jews are subhuman. It's a matter not of appearance, but of blood and inheritance. Hitler decided to kill the Jews of Europe, all of them, including me. I then lived in Paris, France, when Hitler began mass roundups of Jews the Jewish community seized on the only road to collective survival, dispersing the children. In agony of urgency and despair, they sought solutions. Like many Jewish children, I was passed from hand to hand and finally placed in a farm in southern France. The Christian family welcomed me with love. The Nazis murdered thousands of Jewish children in France, but the vast majority, 60,000, escaped their grasp. How is this possible? I went to France with my husband, John Riddell, to research this. My book, Holocaust to Resistance, which, by the way, you can get a copy of, and I will sign it for you. We researched this issue, and it tells the story. A multitude of individuals helped. Some belonged to illegal social agencies, some to armed resistance groups. Some were simply individuals acting spontaneously. Some contributed doing nothing by failing to report the rescue work to the authorities. Immigrants took the lead in the anti-Nazi work. The resistors were of all beliefs, all faiths, including Jewish, Christians, Muslims. As for the sacrifices of Muslims opposing the Nazis, not much is said in history books. But when I went to a French military cemetery, a quarter of the soldiers' gravestones bore the Muslim crescent. Many tens of thousands of Muslims soldiers died fighting to free France from the Nazis. In addition, Muslim civilians living in France contributed to the resistance effort. For example, the Great Mosque in Paris served as a refuge for hundreds of Jews on the run from the Nazis, providing them with false identity papers and Muslim garments as disguise. Muslims helped fugitives travel from Paris to safety. Most Muslims in France were Arabs from the North Africa, but I heard several reports of Muslims in the French anti-Nazi resistance who came from the Soviet Union. My friend Josette Bourrier told me that when she was a young girl in the liberated village of Clavière, close to where I was hidden, she saw Soviet Muslims, resistance fighters, standing guard protecting the villagers against Nazi attack. How did they get there? The invading German army mobilized them into its ranks and sent them to France to fight for the anti-Nazi resistance. The Muslim soldiers had no heart for this war, and many deserted to the anti-Nazi resistance, which prized them for their combat skills. In Algeria, which was never occupied by the Nazis, the French colonial administration acted on its own to put Jews in concentration camps. And this continued even after the US and British armies occupied the region. Jews had come to North Africa centuries earlier as refugees from Christian persecution in Spain. Muslim Algerians welcomed them then and thereafter. Sadly, after the defeat of the Nazis, the French state turned against the Muslim allies and waged a brutal war against Algeria's movement for independence. The contribution of the Muslims and other immigrants to the anti-Nazi struggle was erased from the historical record. But the broad, united, anti-Nazi resistance efforts of my childhood provide an example of the type of anti-racist movement we need now. We see today the rise of a movement for white supremacy, which draws inspiration in part from the Nazis. White racists carried out massacres at both Muslim mosques and Jewish synagogues, as well as against blacks and Latin American immigrants and people of color. In addition, Canada's carbon emissions speed climate change, whose devastation strikes mainly at poor countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan. Large numbers are threatened with loss of home and livelihood. They will need our humanity, our welcome, our protection against the right-wing racists. We must urgently reach out beyond our communities to build a united defense. This unity is rejected by some right-wingers, including, regrettably, some in the Jewish community. They aim their fire not against the racists, but against Muslims. They slander critics of Israel's crimes against Palestinians as anti-Jewish. This year, they tried to get City Hall to ban from city property the Muslim-based pro-Palestinians movement Al-Quds. The leaders of Al-Quds are in fact firm defenders of the Jewish people. We are grateful for Zafar Ben Gash's declaration at a large protest in May. He said, if the Jewish people in Canada are ever under attack, they can be sure that we Muslims will stand at their side.
Yeah.
This touches me deeply. I'm a member of Independent Jewish Voices, as are my friend Sue Goldston and my husband John Riddell. They are here with me today. Independent Jewish Voices speaks out strongly against hatred of Muslims. I and other members of our group joined with the leaders of Al-Quds and of your Islamic society in defending Al-Quds at City Hall. Al-Quds and independent Jewish voices agree in defending each other and working together against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. We call for a united movement against all forms of racism. This goal has deep support in the Canadian population. Please note that in the recent elections held last Monday, in fact, the anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant party got much media attention, but received almost no votes. Unity against racism will arm us as firm protection from the violence of white supremacy. We of independent Jewish voices are proud to join with you in this noble cause. There is mass support for Palestinian rights on every continent, including among the Jewish people like me. And there is a growing international movement of solidarity with Kashmir. Let us work to build this movement together. Like the struggle of the Palestinian people, we support the struggle for dignity and freedom for Kashmiri people. From Kashmir to Palestine, occupation is a crime. Thank you again for the honor of speaking with you.
Thank you.